as we said, we can't have this conversation without talking about the 2.5 months we've just been through. How have the events in Ferguson, as we refer to them, influenced policing? Have they already? Will they going forward?
I think so, and I think what happens in a situation like this is a local story gets nationalized. And I have friends in law enforcement literally on both coasts, and I've talked to them about what's going on. And the lessons that are still being learned in Ferguson are being disseminated. Issues in terms of how to deal better with community members, issues of how the police can better structure interactions with citizens to perhaps avoid situations from escalating where deadly force might be used. So yes, this is something that is definitely on the radar screen across the country in terms of law enforcement.
Is it on the radar screen? Is it more than that? I'm curious if this is something that we'll look back at as kind of a watershed moment.
I think the biggest thing in terms of a watershed moment at this point is likely body cameras. And there has been a move in law enforcement for the last few years. There have been some efforts around the country to evaluate the utility of body cameras in various law enforcement agencies. And I think that this is going to be the crest of the wave is going to break, and body cameras are probably going to be common throughout American law enforcement because of this. So there has been an effort, but I think this is really going to push the effort, and it's going to make it happen much more rapidly than it otherwise would have.
What does the law say about police shootings? This might be a time of learning for the community, too. These are a lot of issues that maybe people never talked about, never thought about.
Right. There's basically 3 levels that are going to govern the use of deadly force by the police. The first is going to be the federal Constitution. And what the court ruled in 1985 in a landmark case, Tennessee versus Garner, basically said police officers are allowed to shoot under 2 circumstances: to protect life, their lives, the life of another innocent, and then also to prevent the escape or affect the arrest of a violent felon who is fleeing from them. And so police officers, according to the U.S. Constitution, are allowed to shoot to stop violent felons from escaping, protect themselves and other innocents from great bodily injury or death. Then every state is going to have a law that permits officers to use deadly force basically around those same parameters. But certain states will say specifically, these are the violent felonies you're allowed to shoot for. Then individual police agencies will have a policy that is allowed to be more restrictive than the state law. And so, for example, a given police agency might say, we don't want you using deadly force to prevent the escape of someone if they're in a vehicle. Or if the only deadly instrument being presented to you is the vehicle, get out of the way instead of firing. So there's a variety of policies that are also going to govern police behavior, and those policies can vary from agency to agency, but they all have to be under the rubric of whatever the state law is in the state of the agency, and of course nothing can violate the federal Constitution.
So that's a lot to think about in a moment of crisis.
Absolutely.
How are officers trained? How do they handle this?
Police officers are basically trained, first of all, in what the constitutional prescriptions are, then in the state law, and then in their individual agency police agency policy. And then what happens is they go out and they do what we call mock scenes, where police officers in the academy or in-service training are put through scenarios, and then the officer has to make a decision. Do I use deadly force? Do I not use deadly force? And then another thing is, in the classroom, in addition to being trained about what the law says, examples of cases will come up and say, here's what would constitute a deadly threat. This police officer in Los Angeles was involved in this, a police officer in New York, a police officer in Kansas City confronted an individual with a knife, a gun. We had the recent tragedy in New York where this crazy man, apparently a jihadi, attacked 4 New York City police officers, broke one guy's arm, hit another guy in the head, and these were all 4 rookies, and they had to kill him. So that's going to be something that's going to be on the training radar in terms of teaching police officers the types of things that could present a deadly threat that would justify the use of deadly force.
That's an interesting phrase there, because I've heard a lot of people ask, why don't they shoot to wound? It happens, that's popular culture in our media. That's what you see in the movies. What you have to kill them? What's the teaching?
The teaching is shoot to stop the threat. And the reason that we don't shoot to wound, 2 reasons. Number one is because if we shoot to wound, typically to an extremity, the odds of us hitting are far lower than if we aim to center mass, which is what police officers are trained to do. And people have to remember that every bullet that misses holds the potential to harm an innocent individual. And so that's the first reason. We don't want to get individuals injured who are completely innocent. The other thing is shooting someone in the arm or the leg isn't oftentimes going to stop the threat. So if I've got a gun pointed at you and you shoot me in my arm, I can still shoot you. You shoot me in the leg, I can still shoot you. The best thing and this is tried, true, tested, and every court in the country agrees, every legislative body in the nation agrees, every police agency across the country agrees, police officers shoot to center mass, because if I aim for someone's torso and I miss by 3 or 4 inches, I'm still going to hit them. If I aim for an arm and miss by 3 or 4 inches, I can hit somebody behind, an innocent party. We don't want that.
So there's no department in the country, just to be clear, that says try to shoot him in the leg first.
That's correct.
And I'm not being flippant about
Right.
that, but people ask that question.
However, what I will say is there are times and places when the time constraints are such that it is not a rush, where sometimes police officers will say, okay, under this circumstance, I can shoot a leg. Under this circumstance, maybe I can aim for an extremity. But that's not the default position. That is an unusual position.
Your thoughts on the state of police-community relations before we bring in the chief here?
They are rough right now, and one of the reasons they're rough, in my opinion, is that the community really doesn't understand what policing is all about. They have a very coarse understanding of policing, and so they tend to group all police officers as a monolith. They're the guys in blue, they're the gals in blue, as opposed to understanding that the people that they're looking at in uniform, they're human beings just as well. And so I think what people need to do is step away from this notion of the police and Officer Klinger, Officer Johnson, Officer Rosenfeld, whatever the case might be. Look at that individual as a human being, then you can create contact and talk about things, as opposed to having this notion that he or she, the officer, is a member of the other. We're all part of the same community. Some of us just wear uniforms for several years.
Of course, the folks who demonstrate would probably say the same about their group as well when it comes to blanketing them as a monolith, as you said.
Absolutely, and that's why on both sides of the equation we need to get past the notion that that person is of a particular kind and say that's a human being. How can I create some contact with that human being?
David.